Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Emergency talks are underway in Brussels Tuesday as EU Home Affairs ministers meet virtually after the Ceuta migrant crisis of last week exposed fresh divisions over Europe's migration policy. Now, Spain presses fellow member states for greater solidarity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the crisis shows the EU must strengthen its external borders, deepen cooperation with Morocco, and prepare for future emergencies. Joining us now to discuss it further is Maciej Kisilowski, Associate Professor at Central European University. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Good morning.
So the crisis of the last few days, are we now beyond it? What can we expect as these Home Affairs ministers meet virtually in Brussels? What kind of concrete actions do you expect from that today?
Well, the crisis, which was really something that Polish society should be sympathetic with, because it looks awfully similar to Lukashenko's hybrid attack on Polish eastern border a few years ago. It's very clear that the mass movement of people, which unfortunately resulted in almost 100 tragic deaths, was at least abated, if not supported, by Moroccan gendarmes, meaning that Moroccan regime of King Mohammed VI was very likely complicit in it, and there is a long history. European Parliament in the past criticized rightly Rabat for weaponizing migration, and we know authoritarian rulers like Mohammed VI, who is, by the way, a big friend of far-right American President Donald Trump, use migration in exerting pressure. We know not only Lukashenko, but Turkish authoritarian leader Erdogan, we remember a few years back, opened the flow of migrants to Greece. So this is a well-known playbook. The only sad part is that the European far right is blaming the victim, which is the Spanish society and the Spanish government, which, by the way, responded very efficiently. I mean, virtually all migrants returned to Morocco within a day, instead of blaming the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, interesting you mentioned Poland there as an example. I mean, that border has now been significantly beefed up. I mean, it took some time, and now it's consistently watched. There are all kinds of video surveillance gear. There's troops on that border. At the same time, I mean, looking at Ceuta, I mean, geographically, it's also a little bit different. But do you think now, also with von der Leyen calling for more Frontex control, so this border agency from the European Union to take more control, more measures in place, do you see this as a shift in terms of what's practically going to happen on the ground?
Well, a little bit different is a bit of an understatement. In Belarus, the only desperate migrants and refugees who could show up on the Polish eastern border in Białowieża had to be flown by Lukashenko regime from the global south. Here we are talking, as Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez rightly pointed out, at the land border between the countries that have the highest per capita income differential in the world, of any land border in the world. We are talking about the desperate continent that is suffering from huge consequences, especially of global warming, where millions of people want to seek better life, and you have this tiny enclave of just 80,000 people. Sure, you can make some improvements in the fence, but short of realizing Rabat's Morocco's and its authoritarian rulers' dream of Spain abandoning Ceuta. We know that that is the goal of Morocco, to basically push Spain out of this small enclave, which historically it's not part of the colonial empire. Spain was there since the 16th century, but still Morocco wants them out. So short of that, this is very, very difficult to, absolutely prevent incidents like that. What Spanish military did very effectively was it brought a situation under control in a very short period of time. And I think the only sad part of this is, apart from the fact that we have neighbors as Europe run by dictatorial regimes who weaponize migration, but we know that. The only other sad thing is that not only the European far right, but unfortunately also the European moderate right, the European People's Party, was criticizing the victim instead of the perpetrator. And let's be frank, the criticism is not because of Ceuta, the criticism is because everybody is furious at Pedro Sánchez for pursuing independent policy. We can say sovereignist policy, to use the far-right language, in a number of important areas, such as regularization of mostly Latin American migrants, over 1 million of Latin American, mostly Latin American migrants, resisting pressure from Washington to increase the military spending or to support the Iran war. I think this is the real reason for the for these intense hatred campaigns against Pedro Sánchez, with one of the PIS politicians calling him a madman from Madrid. This is real outrage, not the fact that we are dealing with weaponization of migration, because that we know.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you point out a lot of criticism against Pedro Sánchez. But at the same time, if we look at that letter that was written by 22 leaders of the European Union just on this past weekend, I mean, that included the signatures of leaders from his own socialist group across Europe. That included the leader of Denmark, the leader of Malta. So is he alone in all this? And if so, will he now change course? I mean, we also have now the test of the Migration Pact. This has just gone into force. So what practical changes do you foresee, if any, in the next days or weeks in Pedro Sánchez?
So again, the far right in Poland and around the world, especially in the European Union, calls for EU that respects national sovereignty. The decision to regularize 1 million migrants, who are, by the way, a very unique situation. We are talking about mostly people from the former Spanish Empire. In Polish state, for example, repatriated thousands of Poles from the previous Soviet Union over the last 30 years. Nobody talks of them as migrants, but we can say that in many ways, Colombians, Venezuelans, people from Honduras, Spanish speakers who are deeply embedded in Spanish culture are in a very similar situation. So calling them migrants, I think the only explanation is the kind of racist fixations of the far right that makes anybody who is from outside Europe seem suspicious. But the irony of this is that Spain is doing what the far right says European Union should allow countries to do, which is it pursues its sovereign policy. These are core sovereign competences of a state, to grant citizenship, to decide on its military expenses. And I think the hypocrisy of the racist far right in Poland and Europe should be brought to light, because the sovereignty cannot be one-way street. The historical sensibilities of Poland, which we always ask Europeans to respect, cannot be a one-way street. We need to understand that the decision to regularize migrants in Spain, again, vast majority of them are Spanish speakers from Latin America, is in a unique historical context that should be respected, and is also a decision for the Spanish government and Spanish society to make, and not for Polish far-right political entrepreneurs to second-guess.
But at the same time, Professor, I mean, you're talking about migrants that have come from Latin America, and I don't have those numbers in front of me now, but we did see in those last few days of Ceuta that imagine that most of those 50, 60,000 people who were, as you said, were already returned were likely not of origin of Latin America. So I just want to also make sure,
and
what
they
we're
don't
looking
qualify
at.
for.
I understand that. I understand that.
I'm happy to. They don't qualify for regularization. I'm happy to provide you more than 2/3 of the application for regularization are from Latin America. And more importantly, Spanish law gives a complete different track of citizenship for Ibero-Americans. It's only 2 years, while for everybody else it's 10 years. So it's a clearly unique situation. Again, I invite any Polish listener to imagine that Poland would have a reservoir of 300 million Polish speakers all around the world. We would welcome them, even the most far-right politicians would welcome them to solve our demographic crisis. We already have a designated website to entice emigrant Poles like me to come back to Poland. It's called powroty.gov.pl, and there is a concerted effort in Poland. I'm not saying this is the same situation because, of course, Venezuelans are not Spanish, but we can't ignore the deep historical roots that are behind Sanchez's decision to regularize these people. Okay. And unfortunately, in the far-right narrative, it all is blended in one racist migrant threat, which is sad.
Well, I think you've also just shown us how very difficult all these layers are, as you said, as we talk about sovereignty, but at the same time we have solidarity in Europe. What does that mean? We're looking at cases that are decided on in Spain with that Supreme Court ruling. We have the European Court of Justice, now this emergency meeting, Schengen, all these things compounding. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time to wrap it up in detail. But look, this is exactly the kind of conversation will be happening in Brussels and probably many capitals over the next few days. But look, thanks for that insight. Really appreciate it today. Professor Maciej Kisilowski, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but do stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.